Taiwan may be small in land area, but its influence in global finance is outsized. One surprising fact is that Taiwan is a significant buyer of US debt. Indeed, they hold so much US debt that surpasses many major economies like Germany, South Korea, and even the two major Asian financial hubs known as Hong Kong and Singapore. Just to show you where Taiwan currently sits at, here's a graph on the largest holders of US Treasuries as of January 2025, data from the US Treasury Department. Here, one can see that Taiwan, while not above major economies like Japan or China, sits above many, many other economies. They hold over $290.4 billion in US Treasuries, which puts them far above the likes of Germany, which is the third largest economy globally as measured by its nominal GDP. With over $290 billion, one can indeed wonder how this can happen. $290 billion in US Treasuries, after all, isn't really small. If we graph out Taiwan's nominal GDP, we get to see that as of 2024, Taiwan only had $767 billion, which means that the size of its US Treasury holdings is more than a third of its entire economy. That's huge. It shows how much Taiwan relies on stable, safe investments, and how deeply it's tied to the US financial system. And what's far more interesting about this is the fact that this isn't something that is new. Taiwan has actually been one of the largest buyers of US Treasuries over the past few years. If we graph out the past 3 years' data, from 2022 to 2025, we get to see that Taiwan's US Treasuries grew from just $247 billion in January of 2022 to over $290 billion in January of 2025. That is the exact opposite of many major economies. For instance, if we graph out China's holdings of US Treasuries, we get to see that they have seen a very big decline from over $1 trillion in 2022 to just $760 billion by January of 2025. And it's not just China that is doing this. Japan, for instance, which has long been one of the biggest economic partners to the United States, has also been reducing their holdings of US Treasuries. Here's a graph on that matter. Here, one can see that Japan used to hold nearly $1.3 trillion in US Treasuries in 2022. But as of the latest month available, their holdings shrunk to just $1.1 trillion, a reduction of nearly $200 billion. So, with this understanding, it makes one wonder why Taiwan is buying US Treasuries while other economies are selling them. Is there something that Taiwan sees that other countries do not? Or does this just showcase how much Taiwan values its relationship with the United States? Well, to understand the reason for Taiwan's purchases of US Treasuries, we must first talk about what US debt is. US debt is basically US Treasury securities, and they are debt instruments that are issued by the US government to finance its spending. If we graph out the federal budget of the United States, we get to see that their government both has expenditures and revenues. Here, you can see that they have over $6.8 trillion in expenditure, which, if we take a look at the revenues, far exceeds it by over $1.8 trillion, as revenues is only at $4.9 trillion. This deficit would then need to be financed somehow, and that's where Treasury securities come in. The US government borrows money by issuing these treasuries to investors around the world, including countries like Taiwan. But then we must answer, why does Taiwan buy so much of US treasuries? Wouldn't it be better, for instance, to buy gold? Or even possibly just hold cash? They could also potentially buy up other government bonds, for instance, from Japan. So, why exactly US treasuries? This is an important point to understand because US treasuries take a large portion of Taiwan's foreign reserves. Let's table out foreign reserves of Taiwan by component. Here, one can see that their official reserve assets amount to a massive $581 billion, of which, however, foreign currency reserves take up the bulk of over $576 billion. This $576 billion of foreign currency reserves is composed of securities, and that very securities may come from the US treasuries. But as you may remember, Taiwan only holds around $290 billion in US treasuries. So the remaining of these securities may come from other sources, possibly including bonds from other advanced economies like Japan, Germany, or the UK. But $290 billion in US treasuries alone is already a lot. So, with all of this, we must now talk about why Taiwan holds so much US treasuries. What's the reason behind this? There are a lot of reasons for holding US treasuries, but arguably, the most important one can be because of the fact that these US treasuries are safe. For a very long time, US treasuries have always been known as amongst the safest investments in the world. Because they are backed by the US government, the risk of default is extremely low. This safety factor is especially important for countries like Taiwan that need to preserve the value of their accumulated dollars. In uncertain times, be it due to global financial instability or regional geopolitical tensions, US treasuries serve as a reliable store of value. Liquidity is another critical advantage. The market for US debt is enormous and highly active, which means that investors can easily buy and sell these securities without causing large price swings. If Taiwan were to hold gold instead, then converting it into cash during an emergency would be much harder. Gold markets, while valuable, are not as liquid, especially at the scale Taiwan operates. Selling billions of dollars worth of gold quickly could cause price fluctuations and delays, making it a risky move in a time-sensitive crisis. Secondly, one must also consider the fact that US treasuries pay out some form of interest, known as the yield. For instance, Taiwan's holdings of over $290 billion can yield anywhere between $5 billion to $10 billion a year, depending on interest rates. That's a substantial return for a government simply parking its money in a safe place. Especially in times of rising interest rates, these yields become even more attractive. Gold, on the other hand, doesn't really offer any income. It just sits there, waiting for its price to go up. And that depends entirely on market demand. Then thirdly, and finally, one may also consider Taiwan's challenging security environment with China. Taiwan, which considers itself a sovereign nation, faces constant pressure and military threats from China, which views the island as a breakaway province. In such a tense and unpredictable environment, economic stability becomes a form of defense. By holding a large amount of US treasuries, Taiwan strengthens its financial ties with the United States, its most important security ally. This isn't just about economics anymore. It's about signaling alignment. The more intertwined Taiwan's economy is with the US, the stronger the implicit support it may receive during a crisis. Now, before we end the video, we must also talk about how Taiwan was able to buy so much US debt to begin with. The reason why Taiwan was able to buy so much US debt can partly be traced to their current account surplus. A current account surplus means that Taiwan exports far more than it imports. This excess of exports brings in large amounts of foreign currency, most notably US dollars. With abundant US dollars on hand, Taiwan's central bank and private investors seek safe, liquid investment opportunities, and US Treasury securities fit the bill perfectly. If we graph out Taiwan's trade with the US, which is one of its biggest trading partners, we even get to see just how much they export to the US whilst not importing that much. This is partly because of Taiwan's strong semiconductor industry, which exports billions of dollars to the United States. This simply shows just how Taiwan was able to buy so much US debt. Now, we also have to talk about Taiwan's private investors and life insurances. Just like any other major country out there, Taiwan's private sector has also become a major player in the bond market. But among private investors, the life insurance industry stands out. Here's a graph on Taiwan's net international investment position. Here one can see that reserves are massive, but what is far larger in size is actually financial institutions beyond banks, which are mostly insurance companies. But as you can see in the graph, in total, The holdings of Taiwan on foreign bonds is massive indeed, more than $1 trillion. So, as one can see, Taiwan's acquisition of US treasuries and bonds are due to many factors. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.